Vouchers is the name and school choice is the game. There are more lawsuits a brewing, and Scott has the story. Scott?
Well, we have a pair of articles about efforts for and against school voucher programs. First, from Maine, Crosspoint Church is appealing a ruling that requires religious schools in state tuition program to comply with the state's anti-discrimination law, which protects LGBTQ students and staff. This follows a Supreme Court decision that allowed religious schools to participate in the program in the first place. The church argues that Maine lawmakers are targeting religious institutions by enforcing the law. Another similar lawsuit involves the Roman Catholic Diocese of Portland. Both cases are being appealed after a federal judge's ruling, which may be reviewed by a higher court. Next, we go to Nebraska. The Nebraska Supreme Court ruled that a ballot measure to repeal a law providing taxpayer-funded private school tuition can appear on the November ballot. The court rejected claims that the measure illegally targeted a government appropriation. Nebraska Secretary of State Bob Evnen had initially certified the repeal, but later claimed it was a mistake and sought to withdraw his certification. The court disagreed, stating that once certified, the measure could not be revoked. Public school advocates who gathered signatures for the repeal praised the decision, while school choice proponents are preparing to campaign against it. These articles are from National Catholic Reporter by Religion News Service on September 10th, 2024, and AP News by Marjorie A. Beck on September 13th, 2024.
Thank you, Scott. And I have my first question for you.
All right.
So, how do differing interpretations of the law reflect broader societal tensions between religious freedom and anti-discrimination protections?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is just that. I think we're seeing different interpretations of the law by the same kinds of bodies that had different opinions before. We see that there's a shift happening here. There's a change. Most noticeably, the change is happening in the Supreme Court. A few years ago, we wouldn't expect the Supreme Court to be supporting funneling public funds to private education institutions, but apparently that's okay now. And so I don't want to say it's unconstitutional per se, because technically the Supreme Court, it's their job to interpret the Constitution. So technically what they're doing is correct constitutionally by definition. Now you could argue that they're going against past history, which I think is what's happening here. We're seeing that there's this conflict. So we have the group that want to discriminate, basically, which to me is baffling. Here, I want to read a quote on that note here, and I know I'm getting sidetracks within sidetracks here, but here's what they said in the article. An attorney for Crosspoint Church in Bangor accused Maine lawmakers of applying the anti-discrimination law to create a barrier for religious schools after the hard-fought Supreme Court victory. The Maine legislature largely this is a quote, the Maine legislature largely deprived the client of the fruits of their victory by amending the law, said David Hacker from the First Liberty Institute, which filed the appeal this week to the First U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. Here's the stinger here. It's engineered to target a specific religious group. That's unconstitutional. And so going back to what you were asking about the tensions between religious freedom and the anti-discrimination protections, here we have religious groups that are specifically saying, if you tell me I can't discriminate, that's going against my religion. I mean, that is literally saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, you couldn't have much of a bigger admission than that. They're saying nobody said anything about Christianity. No, it was about discrimination. If you accept these funds, you can't discriminate. Wait a minute. Why are you picking on Christians like that? Whoops. What did you say there? I mean, it's definitely characteristic of the types of things that we cover very often on the nonprofits. And it perfectly illustrates that tension that you're talking about. We have religious groups that want to be free to discriminate because of their religion. And then we have the government whose job, in theory at least, is to protect the rights of everybody from being discriminated against. And so, I don't think it's going to be going away anytime soon, but I'm not surprised that we have so many stories like this on just this topic.
It's so interesting. And then, AJ, I'm going to bring you into it because, like, this is just nothing but a circulation of history. If you guys remember, for those of you all who may be out there in internet land who are old enough to remember that Liberty University and Bob Jones University were told specifically, and they lost a Supreme Court case back in the 70s that said that if you want to receive government funds, you cannot discriminate against who you could have coming to your school. And at that time, they were actively keeping out Black students from their schools. I would love to ask the Black students at the time who applied to go to Bob Jones University and Liberty University, what the fuck is wrong with you? But I digress. They said to them, hey, you cannot discriminate your admissions, so you have to or let them in if you want to get funds, right? And they reluctantly did it, and then they changed their politics to be, against abortion, which historically they were, just so they can rally the right. But, that's a different story. That's a different topic. So, but I found it like so ironic that religious institutions like Liberty University, like Bob Jones University, is basically doing the same damn thing all over again in 2024. I mean, OMG. But this is my issue, and this is what I'm concerned about. And then, AJ, I want you to respond. My concern is that now the target is LGBTQI plus people. And the argument could be, of course, we can discriminate against the LGBTQ community because their mere existence is sinful. God doesn't like these people. Therefore, we don't like these people, and therefore we can discriminate. AJ, now that I have brought that up, what are your thoughts?
Scott said it. He said he was not surprised. And here I am. Why am I not surprised that a religious organization is asking basically for permission to be hateful? Two of the schools involved in the lawsuit in Maine, Cross Point Church and St. Dominic's Academy, which is a Catholic church, are requesting to not follow these anti-discriminatory laws. And these laws require any school participating in the tuition program, religious or not, to abide by the Maine Human Rights Act. This act includes protections for LGBTQ students and faculty. So it goes for both all of the students and the people that work there, the teachers, the janitor, anybody. Right here, these are protections for gender identity, for example, for expression, for sexual orientation. And they also made it illegal for these types of schools or institutions to force students into conversion therapy, which was only banned very recently in 2019 in Maine. There are still 20 states in the United States that allow conversion therapy, including Oklahoma, Nebraska, Louisiana, and Texas, right? And these kinds of schools want to be able to use public school funds, and they want to draw them for their vouchers and use their tuition programs, all the while discriminating freely against LGBTQ people the same way that they discriminated back then against Black people.
I would just want to tell these people, like, listen, yeah, go ahead, discriminate all you want, but you can't use taxpayer monies in order for you to run.
Seems obvious. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, it was the same way with Liberty University and Bob Jones University. Like, hey, if you don't want to let Black people in, you can't get funded. You can't get federal funding, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same way with these particular schools. Like, listen, if you want to take advantage of getting state funding in order for you to operate, then you can't discriminate. If you want to discriminate, then do it on your own dime. Don't do it on ours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just, racial issues, too. There's also LGBTQ issues, as you mentioned, right. But also in hiring practices, too. If they accept these monies, then they not only have a responsibility to their students, but also to their faculty and staff. And so that's been a rubbing point as well. And so, yeah, it boils down to this, we want religious freedom, and that means we also want to be able to break these other laws about discrimination. And, it's really an offensive, privileged position, and it's surprising to me. It's not surprising that they're doing it, but it's surprising to me that they are able to say these kind of things out in public, in front of people, and Yeah, and
court,
they're expecting to be respected for that. Like they're sticking with their religious guns here, and it's I don't know. It's really appalling. It's just another example of where's the harm in religion. If good people do good things and bad people do bad things, but it takes something like religion to make good people do bad things. Here's some good people presumably doing some bad things, and it's because of this. I mean, I don't know. I almost want to just say, I'm not going to comment. You can keep talking because you're making my case for me, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the more that you actually keep using these hateful narratives in order for you to push your point, the more that you are making our argument work for us.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I want to ask you both, what do you think, or how do you think the personal stories like those families involved in these lawsuits are shaping or can shape public opinion? AJ, I want you to chime in on that. And then Scott, I want you to reply.
So I think these stories actually shape both sides. They can shape the side of religious people where they feel more empowered to come out and say all these hateful things and to continue to demand unreasonable rewards, I guess you could say, with the tuition programs, because they think that no matter what rules they set, they still should be able to get the benefits. And at the same time, it brings light to all this hatefulness, and it allows people to realize how harmful this is becoming and how we cannot allow all these religious organizations to draw from public funding that could go to public schools and use it for their indoctrination purposes.
Scott, what about you? What do you think? How this is going to shape
I think AJ nailed it right there. I think that personal stories add an element to the data, really. We as human beings, we're very storytelling oriented. We try to describe things using stories. Our memory works based on storytelling associations. And so hearing a story of real harm that's being caused by these policies can have a huge impact on somebody. As a statistics teacher, I also worry about having individual stories having too much of an impact, right? We often say that anecdotes, the plural of anecdotes, is not data. And so I think we just lost Cynthia, so we'll just keep talking until we get her back here. But so having these personal stories for people to latch on can make a big difference here. And I want to point out something that I saw in the story on the Nebraska ballot initiative, AJ, and then maybe you can comment on what I saw here. But I mean, not only are we is it this being harmful to people, but it's really undermining the voice of the public, right? It's really, I mean, we have this what was he, Secretary of State, right? Not only does he want to support these school voucher programs, but he also wants to keep the public from airing their opinion on it, and that's really what the ballot initiative was for. And so Cynthia, we went on to another question while you were away, so I hope we can reconnect here when I'm done with this. But yeah, so I mean, I read, when I was doing my research for this, I came across a claim in Forbes magazine, and I couldn't verify this, so I'm just offering it for food for thought. But their claim was that no voucher proposal has ever survived a direct vote by a state's taxpayers. And whether or not that's true, that's certainly what's happening here, is that there's a clear majority among the taxpayers that want this thing repealed. They had a certain amount of thousands of signatures that they needed, and they went several thousand beyond that. And so there's this massive upwelling of support for repealing this law that allows Nebraska to funnel money into private religious organizations. But it's just really underhanded the way the Secretary of State is approaching this. He's literally trying to shut the public up when his job is the exact opposite of that. Sorry, Cynthia.
You're
we'll
fine.
Go back to you here.
You're totally fine, because that was actually where I was was heading to is about the referendum.
Right. Yeah. We're simpatico here.
Yeah.
So this will be for like the first question, right? On the Nebraska?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Glenn added all of this.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah.
Oh, yes. But yeah, but I did want to talk a little bit more about the referendum because, like, you know, I'm thinking that in my head, if we're like trying to do like a correlation between both of these stories, you have one area where, you know, they don't want to let in certain students, or they want to feel free to discriminate against students, against faculty, and still get, you know, government funding. But going on to Nebraska, we have like the whole portion of the public being able to weigh in on if they want to repeal the program, the private school funding, and you actually seem to have support from the public to say that yes, this is something that we want to do.
Right.
But the Secretary of State is like, nuh-uh, you know, because that is the best argument ever to have in life, as we all know. But I'm wondering, and I think that you possibly touched on this a bit, Scott, but AJ, if you can kind of just like, you know, run in with your thoughts about it, is like, how can shifts in state legislation like those seen in Nebraska impact the accessibility and funding of public education compared to private education?
That is a good question.
Right. And Scott, if you want to jump in on that question, and then AJ, you can reply to your thoughts, please do so.
Could you give me a quick repeat on the question, Cynthia?
I certainly can.
All right. I'd be happy
I really can. Watch out here. Here's a repeat. Glenn, edit. How can shifts in state legislation like those seen in Nebraska impact the accessibility and funding of public education compared to private education?
Sure. And if by that, if you mean shifts towards supporting voucher programs, then I mean, I've talked about voucher programs so many times on the nonprofits. It's just it's like a permanent record going on in my mind right now. And the voucher programs undermine public education significantly in many different ways. But as you're talking about, it makes it difficult for those schools to get some of the funding, I mean, to support their programs. And so the programs suffer. And so then they give the impression that the public schools are not doing as well. Why are they not doing as well? Maybe they're not as good. And, you know, and so let's give them even less money. And so it can start kind of this snowball effect, which I don't know. I don't know this for sure, but I have a strong suspicion that destroying the public education system is part of the plan. And so it sure seems that way to me, at least. It sure seems that way. And so when we, like in Nebraska, when we see the public starting to push back, then we can see what the lawmaker, what they need to resort to. They need to give their argument and say, oops, I approve that, but I need that back. Can I have that back? Can you just give that back to me? And then I'll deny it instead. And, you know, I don't know, it's just not flying. Well, in this case, it's not flying because the Nebraska Supreme Court supported his initial assessment of the program. But yeah, I mean, it's just voucher programs already target that money that's needed by the public education system. And this just exacerbates that whole thing.
Yeah, I think what Scott just said, it's actually very true. It is part of the plan because it is part of what the conservative SAD is trying to do, specifically with Project 2025. They are actually trying to not just use the voucher programs, but actually completely undermine the Department of Education. And this goes to show that they are trying to make it to where less people are going to go into public schools and more people are going to go into these private schools, which I believe about 75% are religious.
Right.
It's not even like undermine the Department of Education. They want to completely get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely get rid of it and just basically just have the control of how education looks be determined by the state. But the scary part about any of this, like when we're looking at whether if we look at Maine, if we look at Nebraska, or if we even look at like, other states that we have covered on the nonprofits previously, is that we already know that school voucher programs are not equitable. They are going to, and school choice is not real choice. Yeah. And also the main people that are going to suffer under particular programs like this, especially when you're diverting money away from the public education system, are marginalized groups. And
definitely.
Yeah. And especially like if you are able to have funding on the public level, go to a private school that is allowed to discriminate, what type of education do you believe will be accessible to those who happen to be in a marginalized community? If they want to roll back protections for LGBTQ people, or even if we say, hey, we want to go back to how we used to operate in Jim Crow, and as we talked about even in earlier segments, how a young person at the time was exposed to racist rhetoric and it was backed up by the Bible. And that is what that particular church used in order for them to say that you, being who you are, because you're Black or what have you, that you are automatically inferior. So, and God made you that way. So that means that you have to have a subservient attitude, and you also have to have a subpar living condition, subpar education, subpar everything, because that is the position that you're supposed to be.
Right.
But I'm curious to know, and both of you all, please weigh in on this. AJ, I want you to start, and then Scott, I'll have you round up. What strategies might public school advocates employ to effectively counteract the financial resources of school choice proponents in upcoming elections?
I think, advocacy really plays a key role in counteracting bad legislation, whether it has already been enacted or if it's something that is, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to start over. Did you hear that beeping?
Yeah,
I apologize.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Glenn is going to have the greatest time editing.
Oh, yeah, boy, he's going to be busy tonight.
Yeah, he is. Okay.
I'm going to start from the top. I'll start from the top so make it easier on him.
Right.
Okay, so advocacy plays a key role in counteracting bad legislation, whether it has already been enacted or it's been voted on. And this isn't the first time that Republicans have tried to use public money to fund private school tuition. Last year, Republicans in the Nebraska legislature actually passed a bill to allow corporations and individuals to divert millions of dollars that they owed in state income taxes to nonprofit organizations, right? Then these nonprofits will give that money as a gifted scholarship to private schools. But we have to consider that nearly 80% of private schools in the U.S. are religious. So public school advocates with their organization called Support Our Schools successfully gather signatures to repeal that law. However, supporters of the private school funding bill just replaced the bill with another one this year, and that dumped the tax credit funded funding system, and it simply just awards private schools scholarships directly from state funds. That's a big problem here.
Yeah, and I would echo that too. I think what AJ was talking about, advocacy. I think that's really the main weapon that we have to support public schools. It's because we're in an age of information, but we're also in an age of misinformation, and so I think I'm a strong believer that knowledge is power. And so knowing about the situation not only helps you to recognize that it's happening, which, many people, depending on your news source, depending on what part of the country you live in, depending on, are you part of your parents' household and, have to go along with what they say, there's a variety of reasons or variety of things that are going to affect your opinion and position and your knowledge of this situation. But if you can get information that's reasonable, if you can then then you can use that information to do crazy thought here, do your own thinking. But knowledge also helps you know things like, what can I do? Does my vote affect this? How should I vote? Sometimes they phrase like those referenda on ballots. Sometimes they phrase them kind of in tricky ways to try to manipulate how people will vote on those kind of things. And so, but knowing what's being discussed here, knowing what's being voted on, knowing that you can call your senator or call your superintendent or call your principal or whatever, knowing that you have those options can make a big deal. And so I think knowledge, I'll just repeat it, knowledge is power. And I think that's definitely true in situations like this, especially when the population might otherwise be helpless. Mm-hmm. Right. If Bob Envin had been allowed to do this, if he had been allowed to revoke his approval of that repeal, allowing the repeal onto the ballot, then he's completely bypassing the people's voice, like I was saying before. But yeah, I think knowledge definitely is the key there.
Speaking of the upcoming elections, I think people often don't realize that it's not just the presidential election, that during the voting, you're going to be voting on so many local offices and representatives, and you're going to be voting on local, actions and things that are going to affect your smaller scale community, even including your schools.
Yeah, policy measures, whether they are people or actual, things about what are you going to do or support, is on ballots too. So it definitely helps to pay attention to what's happening in your state, and especially on some of the things that are going to be put forward, so you know how to work that. Okay. Right. Yes. Yep. How to work that. Well, the recent legal battles in Maine and Nebraska illustrate the ongoing tension between school choice initiatives and anti-discrimination laws. In Maine, the Crosspoint Church Appeal challenges state requirements that religious schools adhere to the Maine Human Rights Act, which aims to protect LGBTQ rights. The church argues that the anti-discrimination law undermines the Supreme Court's ruling favoring religious schools' participation in state tuition programs. Meanwhile, in Nebraska, a court ruling allows the repeal measure of a private school funding law to appear on the ballot, highlighting public opposition to diverting taxpayer money to private institutions. Advocates argue that public schools are vital to community cohesion and should not be sidelined by private school funding initiatives. These cases underscore the complexities of balancing religious freedoms, anti-discrimination efforts, and educational equity in the current political landscape. And if you, dear viewer, want to hear more about equity, inclusion, anti-discrimination efforts, religious freedom, separation of church and state, and yada, 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 click here.